What occurs when the host of late-night television disapproves of his own guests? Johnny Carson was recognized for his charisma, intelligence, and polished presentation. However, behind the scenes, there were certain celebrities he could scarcely tolerate. From uncomfortable interviews to fraught moments that never transitioned off set, Carson had his boundaries, and some celebrities tested them far beyond acceptable limits. You may believe you are aware of the individual who caused him displeasure, but await the revelation of who secures the top position. Let us explore the list of guests that Johnny Carson regretted having welcomed onto his sofa. Lola Fana. Let's commence with the illustrious Lola Falana, the reigning queen of Las Vegas. Historically, this woman was ubiquitous, performing as a singer and dancer, illuminating stages throughout the United States. She was an exceptional performer who attained her reign through innate talent and compelling charisma. When Fana appeared on The Tonight Show, she was there to discuss her remarkable residency in Las Vegas. Music, it appears to be an ideal arrangement, does it not? Not entirely. The discussion took an unforeseen direction when Fana began articulating candidly about racial concerns and the discrimination she had observed within the entertainment industry. Now, Carson was not particularly recognized for engaging in profound social commentary, and this entirely took him by surprise. However, there is additional drama to consider. Fana's major performance was scheduled at the Aladdin Hotel. Music, indeed, that is Aladdin. The same issue that became a significant point of contention between Carson and Wayne Newton. Without any effort, Falana became inadvertently involved in the conflict between Carson and Newton. Discuss being in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Following that appearance, Falana's invitations to The Tonight Show inexplicably ceased. She consistently excelled in Las Vegas for years, but Johnny's door remained firmly closed. Occasionally, expressing your authentic self through music entails a cost, even when you are merely being truthful about your experiences. Dana Carvey. Saturday Night Live propelled Dana Carvey to comedy prominence, and initially, their relationship appeared to be harmonious. He secured those highly sought-after appearances on The Tonight Show, and Johnny appeared sincerely impressed by the young comedian's talents. However, Carvey committed a significant mistake. He directed his impression talents specifically toward the late-night host himself. Initially, there was the SNL segment titled Carcinio, a harsh parody in which Carvey depicted Johnny as an aging, desperate figure attempting to emulate Arsenio Hall's more modern and youthful style. The caricature essentially depicted Carson as antiquated and struggling to maintain his relevance. That was unfortunate. However, this is where the situation becomes quite extraordinary. Carvey boldly performed a rendition of this impression directly in front of Carson on The Tonight Show. Imagine ridiculing your presenter while seated in his studio during his program, to music, his expression, the level of confidence, or perhaps the total absence of awareness of the social dynamics, was remarkable. Music, Carson did not find it amusing in the slightest. The invitations ceased to arrive. When Wayne's World achieved widespread success and Carvey had the opportunity to utilize The Tonight Show for promotion, Carson ensured that this did not occur. For his final year of an illustrious career, Johnny maintained a respectful distance from Carvey, demonstrating that one does not challenge the monarch within his own domain. Ed McMahon, you may have thought. Wait, Ed McMahon, his own sidekick? The individual who laughed at his jokes for 3 decades? Indeed, this is unexpected. However, the reality is more nuanced than what viewers observed on screen. On camera, Johnny and Ed exhibited remarkable synergy. Ed's vibrant personality and resonant laughter complemented Johnny's subtle humor and impeccable timing. They appeared to be close companions, enjoying their time together immensely each and every night. However, once those cameras were deactivated, the circumstances changed significantly. The issue was straightforward. They were entirely contrasting. Ed was the central figure of the gathering, extroverted and sociable, consistently prepared to engage with anyone and everyone. Johnny, by contrast, was exceedingly reserved, nearly reclusive. He refrained from participating in the Hollywood party scene and certainly did not wish to socialize over beverages after work. Several individuals involved in the production have verified that Johnny and Ed seldom spent time together outside of the studio. It was conducted in a strictly professional manner. Even more startling, Johnny allegedly informed his own son that he was unable to tolerate Ed McMahon. That is a rather harsh remark to make about a colleague with whom you have worked daily for 30 years. The most unusual aspect is that they managed to make it function. Their on-screen rapport appeared so authentic that viewers at home could not perceive any underlying tension behind the scenes. It merely demonstrates that the most effective professional relationships do not necessarily depend on personal companionship, but rather on mutual respect and a shared understanding of what constitutes quality television. Rich Little. Rich Little established his entire career on the premise of being a highly skilled impersonator. He has the ability to imitate any individual. Presidents, film celebrities, and indeed, Johnny Carson. For some time, Johnny appeared to be agreeable to it. Little was a frequent guest, and Carson would smile and chuckle whenever Little performed his impression during their conversations. However, in the background, Johnny was recording the score. Every time Little Carson attended a nightclub or awards ceremony, it troubled him more than he publicly acknowledged. See, Carson was highly protective of his reputation and his brand. Having an individual impersonating Johnny Carson at various events appeared to suggest that Little was unauthorizedly assuming his identity. The decisive moment occurred in 1982 when Little's appearances on The Tonight Show abruptly ceased. Rich stated in his autobiography that Carson had him prohibited from performing due to his excessive impersonations of him. The producers of the program presented a different account. They stated that Little Zach has become somewhat monotonous and repetitive. Traditional, he stated, they asserted scenario. This is the critical point. Little ultimately achieved his retribution in the most exemplary manner. When HBO produced The Late Shift, a film depicting the intense competition to succeed Carson, who portrayed Johnny Rich Little himself. Consider the scenario of being prohibited from participating in an individual's performance and subsequently receiving compensation to portray that individual in a prominent film. That is quite an extraordinary instance of irony. Wayne Newton and Johnny Carson initially established themselves as sincere companions. Newton appeared on The Tonight Show 30 times, leveraging that platform to enhance his reputation and solidify his status as a Las Vegas legend. Everything proceeded smoothly until financial and property interests became involved. In 1980, both individuals expressed an interest in acquiring the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. When Newton's proposal prevailed over Carson's, a subtle shift occurred. Johnny did not respond well to his defeat and began utilizing his platform to criticize Newton. The humor in his monologues ranged from lighthearted to incisive, focusing on Newton's physical appearance and performance mannerisms. However, Carson crossed a significant boundary when he began making quips, music, suggesting that Newton was linked to organized crime. That does not merely involve criticizing an individual's hairstyle or performance on stage. That profoundly damaging allegation presented within a comedic context. Newton was not amused. The situation escalated to the extent that Wayne Newton personally visited Carson's office to convey a warning. Cease making quips, or there will be repercussions. Music. Carson refrained from making the most severe quips, but the friendship had already ended. Newton was not extended any further invitations to participate in the program. What began as a professional relationship and authentic friendship ultimately concluded due to a failed business agreement. Occasionally, financial concerns have the potential to undermine all aspects of a situation. Oliver Reed. If you wish to observe Johnny Carson entirely disengaged and uneasy, watch his interview with British actor Oliver Reed. This was a complete failure from beginning to end, and you could observe Johnny mentally estimating the remaining minutes until he could escape. The situation took a turn for the worse when fellow guest Shelley Winters chose to pour her liquor over Reed's head during the conversation. Rather than alleviating the atmosphere, it merely increased the awkwardness. Reed continued attempting to make quips and alleviate the tension, but Carson remained unimpressed. Throughout the entire segment, Johnny appeared remarkably disinterested. Typically, he would interact with visitors, respond to their stories with amusement, and match their enthusiasm. Reed has nothing, simply vacant eyes and monitoring the passage of time. Music. When Reed articulated a point on a particular matter, Carson would often counter with his own perspective, not in a lighthearted debate manner, but in a manner that suggests the audience is indifferent to your opinion. There was a moment when Johnny appeared to struggle to suppress a smile, and not in a positive manner. It was the grimace of an individual enduring an experience they profoundly despised. The entire interview was characterized by an unusual antagonistic atmosphere that was entirely inconsistent with Carson's typical polished hosting manner. Nobody can precisely determine what about Reed specifically troubled Johnny. Perhaps the excessive alcohol consumption, the exuberant British actor demeanor, or simply a conflict of personalities. Whatever the circumstances, this remains one of the most discomforting Tonight Show interviews on record, with Carson exhibiting no attempt to conceal his disinterest. Charlie Collis. Charlie Collis was a comedian renowned for his expressive facial gestures, eccentric characters, and particularly his remarkable sound effects. He was able to produce sounds that appeared inconceivable for a human mouth to generate. Music, Carson appreciated him for it, having booked Collis nearly 50 times over the course of 2 decades. That demonstrates genuine loyalty. Then arrived the appearance in 1982 that conclusively brought everything to an end. Collis appeared and performed his routine. However, this time it failed to connect effectively. The humor was unsuccessful. The audience was unresponsive, and the decline in engagement was evident in real time. Now Carson was an expert in revitalizing failing comedy. He was able to transform an unsuccessful jest into an even more humorous one by recognizing the failure. This time, Johnny reacted to Collis's faltering routine by producing a whistle that resembled the sound of an explosive detonating. It was his manner of indicating that this approach was ineffective through humor. Certainly, that is acceptable. Performers recognize when a piece of material has become exhausted. However, Collis committed a disastrous error. He forcefully pushed Carson. He intended it as a light-hearted reply, similar to friends engaging in casual banter. However, he entirely misinterpreted the nature of the relationship. They appeared amicable on television, but they were not individuals who could engage in physical interactions with each other. Carson's response was immediate and uncompromising. "You will not have the opportunity to appear on this program again." Right there on live television in front of millions of viewers, Collis became distressed, attempted to dismiss it as a jest, and implored Johnny to reconsider. The audience remained in an uneasy silence. Carson remained unmoved. He intended every word he said. Carson continued to host for an additional 10 years, and Charlie Collis was never referenced again. His career persisted due to his association with Mel Brooks, but he permanently forfeited the limelight on The Tonight Show. A single push and decades of benevolence dissipated in an instant. Joan Rivers. This is particularly painful because Johnny Carson and Joan Rivers shared a sincere friendship. Carson did not merely arrange for Rivers to appear as a guest. He appointed her as a regular guest host, allowing her to occupy his seat during his evenings off. Rivers acknowledged Carson for initiating her career, providing her with the exposure necessary to achieve stardom. For many years, everything remained impeccable. Subsequently, the year 1986 occurred. Fox extended an offer to Rivers for her own late-night talk program, positioning it as a direct competitor to Carson. This represented a significant milestone for Joan, her own program, her own platform, and an opportunity to emerge from Johnny's shadow. However, she committed a significant error that defined her career. She did not inform Carson of it beforehand. When the information was released, Johnny learned of it through informal channels rather than directly from Rivers herself. He experienced a sense of betrayal, caught off guard by an individual whom he had trusted and supported. Carson did not merely prohibit Rivers from appearing on his program. He explicitly communicated to the entire entertainment industry that any individual appearing on her program would be permanently barred from appearing on the Tonight program. Consider the magnitude of that moment. Carson could effectively prohibit guests from appearing on Rivers' program, as they sought to avoid losing access to his significantly larger platform. It significantly restricted Joan's booking opportunities, which adversely affected the success of her performance. Within a year, she was no longer the presenter, and the program ultimately became Arsenio Hall's responsibility. Rivers endeavored to repent and to re-establish the friendship, but Carson did not respond. He remained silent for the remainder of his existence. When he passed away in 2005, they had yet to communicate. Joan publicly conveyed her remorse regarding the manner in which events concluded, expressing a desire to have managed the situation differently. Music. It stands as one of the most tragic feuds in television history, as it was unnecessary. One discussion, a single preliminary call prior to the agreement, and perhaps they would still maintain their friendship. Instead, arrogance and wounded emotions undermined a significant relationship. Bob Hope. Bob Hope was a legendary figure in comedy, an icon who entertained military personnel, achieved prominence in films, and was essentially considered Hollywood aristocracy. Johnny Carson acknowledged his significance in history. However, that was the extent of his reverence. Behind the scenes, Carson found it intolerable to work alongside Hope. The issue stemmed from their fundamentally divergent orientations to comedy. Carson emphasized rapid cognition and spontaneous adaptation. He appreciated spontaneous instances, engaging improvisation with visitors, and discovering humor in unforeseen circumstances. Bob Hope, conversely, depended solely on scripted material composed by his team. Each quip, narrative, and response was meticulously prepared in advance. Carson's chief writer, Andrew Nichols, articulated it flawlessly. Hope relied entirely on his authors for assistance, whereas Johnny prospered through authentic dialogue. When Hope appeared on The Tonight Show, he was only able to respond to particular queries in a predetermined sequence. If Carson deviated from the script and posed an unforeseen question, Hope might provide an entirely incorrect response due to his reliance on prepared notes. After a notably difficult interview in the 1980s, during which Hope appeared disoriented and despairing, Carson's music is said to have told his staff, "If I ever find myself in that state, I want you to shoot me." This reflected his strong desire to avoid becoming the person Bob Hope had become. Off camera, the situation was even more dire. When Frank Sinatra arranged a gala in honor of Ronald Reagan's inauguration, both Carson and Hope were invited to perform. Although Johnny was one of the main performers and Hope had a less prominent role, Bob chose to provide Carson with assistance. Hope located Johnny and provided him with several pages. "Here, I have composed several lines that you may find suitable for use." Carson courteously expressed his gratitude, although he was internally filled with rage. Upon Hope's departure, Johnny expressed his displeasure to his crew. "Can you believe the audacity of that individual to presume I require his jokes?" The most challenging aspect for Carson was his inability to evade Hope. NBC valued Bob Hope highly due to his continued ability to attract substantial viewership. The network had granted Hope indefinite access to the studio utilized by Carson. It was Johnny's designated space, except when Bob required access to it. Hope also possessed the authority to schedule himself on The Tonight Show at any time he wished in order to promote his numerous NBC specials. Carson's producer, Peter Lasley, characterized the ordeal as a form of torment. "We would receive a request, and Johnny would respond once more, prompting me to ask, 'Do you wish to decline?' Carson understood he could not refuse, as Hope held significant influence at NBC. The decisive moment occurred during one of Hope's subsequent appearances. Carson delivered a monologue that was utterly exceptional. The audience was resoundingly laughing. Bob Hope, observing from backstage, inquired whether he could utilize the recording of that audience's hilarity to enhance the quality of his own distinctive sound. He sought to leverage Carson's success to conceal his own inadequate material. Carson was taken aback by the boldness, but ultimately consented. That moment encapsulated all of Johnny's disdain for Bob Hope. The sense of desperation, dependence on others, and the diminishing capacity to achieve success through his own merit. Certainly, respect for his musical legacy. However, genuinely desiring to collaborate with him is not the case at all. Don Rickles. And now, the moment you have been anticipating. The #1 spot belongs to Don Rickles. But here's the wrinkle. This was not a relationship founded on hostility or sincere hostility. It was something much more complicated, much more entertaining, and honestly, much more enjoyable. Let's establish the context. Johnny Carson came back from a night off, sat down at his desk, and immediately noticed something was amiss. His cigarette box, a box he'd had for years, something he brought with him all the way from New York, was shattered. The timbre was fractured. The work was ruined. What precisely transpired with this? Carson inquired, visibly distressed. Before anyone could respond, voices from the audience and personnel began exclaiming, "Rickles!" The bandleader, Doc Severson, acknowledged it. Don Rickles had damaged it the night prior while serving as a guest host alongside Bob Newhart. He'd been goofing around, banging on the desk during some bit, and accidentally destroyed Johnny's prized possession. Carson was not happy. "That's an heirloom," he declared. Then someone mentioned that Rickles was filming his sitcom CPO Sharkey directly across the hall at that very moment. You could see the wheels turning in Carson's cranium. "Can I get over there?" he asked production. When they said yes, Carson snatched his broken box and a microphone and abandoned his studio audience. A camera tracked his progress as he proceeded through the corridors toward the double doors illuminated by blinking red lights. The universal sign that filming was in action. "Are they recording?" Carson inquired. Then, without awaiting a response, "I am indifferent as to whether they are broadcasting." He stormed through those doors as though driven by a singular purpose. "Cease the recording. Someone damaged my cigarette case." Rickles completely lost his composure. He doubled over laughing, nervous perspiration visible on his forehead as Carson stood there holding up the evidence. "They informed me that you damaged it during the performance last evening." "Well, Rickles struggled to articulate words, stumbling over my mirth. "You big fool," Carson exclaimed. The entire situation was simultaneously amusing and legitimately tense, as it was difficult to determine whether Johnny was truly angry or exaggerating for comedic effect. That was the brilliance of their dynamic. Rickles attempted to make a joke, implying that he would present the shattered box to Tony Randall as a wedding gift. Carson was not cooperating. "I would like to inquire about the actions you intend to take regarding this matter." When Rickles declined to offer a sincere apology, Carson remarked upon his ailing sitcom. He even made an inappropriate racial jest to one of Rickles's black co-stars, advising him to retain his other employment because, if this show proceeds as the others have, he will be unemployed by January. Ultimately, Rickles issued an apology and committed to rectifying the situation. "Well, I trust so," Carson replied, acknowledging his irritation. "I desire to recover something." However, the narrative does not conclude at this point. 2 years later, Rickles once again served as the guest presenter of The Tonight Show, this time accompanied by Carol O'Connor. In characteristic Rickles style, he became overly enthusiastic during a routine and began striking Carson's desk. Suddenly, he recognized with alarm that he was on the verge of damaging the box once more, whether through repair or replacement following the initial incident. Rickles halted abruptly. He handled the box with reverence, as if it were a sacred relic, and commenced reciting a protective supplication over it. When Carson passes away, he informed O'Connor with utmost sincerity, "I am going to place him in this." This statement encapsulates the essence of the Carson-Rickles relationship perfectly. They mutually drove one another to the brink of madness. Music. Rickles consistently challenged boundaries, and Carson would feign outrage while covertly enjoying every moment. Unlike all others on this list, their rivalry was essentially two comedy professionals engaging in the longest-running act in television history. Johnny Carson was the quintessential figure in late-night television. However, he remained human. He had his limits, his personal peeves, and his breaking points. Some visitors overstepped boundaries they were unaware of. Others violated his trust or undermined his intelligence. A few individuals simply rubbed him the wrong way, despite no genuine error of their own. Thank you for your attention. Which of these rivalries was the most unexpected to you? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And please remember to subscribe for additional engaging narratives from the annals of television.